Comment, like, subscribe. The bell keeps you notified. It helps the show thrive. Tea is so much more than just the world's second most popular drink, just behind water of course. Tea is part of culture and identity in so many places, from aromatic herbal teas sipped in places like China and India, to mugs of the stuff drowned in milk and served with biscuits here in the United Kingdom. In fact, the majority of name explain videos are created while tea is being consumed. It's that important. It would be easy to think that because of tea's universal popularity, that it would have different names in every language, with each language and culture creating their own name for the leaves and the fluid it creates. This, however, is not the case at all. Tea, despite its huge popularity, only really has two names across pretty much all languages. The drink is either called tea or cha. Well, kind of. While it's not one of these two names exactly, it is a spelling variation of one of these two names. For example, variations of the tea spelling include the English tea, as well as the French tea, the Icelandic tea, and the Italian tea, while cha variations include the Chinese cha, the Hindi che, and the Russian che. So while a lot of sources, including myself in the title of this very video, like to tout how there are only two words for tea, that really isn't the case. There are only two roots, however, in which all these names stem from, so it's kind of true. Regardless, tea's two names across planet Earth all come down to the history of this plant and the brew it can create. Tea is ultimately of Chinese origins, despite the fact it did grow natively in other places. The earliest evidence we have of the cultivation of tea in China comes from around 1600 BC. There is a mythical tale revolving around tea's origins too. The story goes that a deity by the name of Shennong was boiling water near a bush when suddenly it burst into flames. This was of course a tea bush, and the burnt leaves ended up in his boiling water. Upon drinking them, the deity realized that this drink had many potentials, and thus tea was born, according to mythology anyway. For so long, tea didn't really have a name unto itself in Chinese. It was just called the bitter plant. This is because unprocessed tea was a lot more bitter than its modern counterpart. The Chinese character for bitter plant, however, is this, and it's pronounced as tu. It wasn't until the 8th century, however, that this drink got a name unto itself to differentiate it from all the other bitter plants out there. This new name was given to the drink by scholar Lu Yu, who literally wrote the book on tea called Cha Jing, which is the tea classic in English. The unique name he created for the plant/drink in Chinese is this character, and you may very well be thinking that this looks identical to the initial Chinese character for bitter plant. There is, however, one slight difference, that being one less stroke. Some believe that this was actually a spelling error on Lu Yu's behalf, while others believe that it was intentional to differentiate its name from the generic term of bitter plant in Chinese. Whatever the case, this new character stuck around as the specific name for the drink, and while it may look similar to the character pronounced as tu, it is pronounced completely differently, being pronounced as cha instead. Yep, this is where the first of the two main forms of the name we have on our planet today come from. However, it was only pronounced as cha in the part of China in which Lu Yu was writing from. China is a humongous part of the world, and like anywhere big or small, there is a huge variety of languages and dialects in the land. So while the character was pronounced as cha in some dialects, most noticeably in Mandarin and Cantonese, two of China's most popular forms, it was not pronounced as cha in all forms of Chinese. A prime example of this is with Southern Min. This is another branch of the various languages and dialects spoken in China, which unto itself has a subversion known as the Amoy dialect. If you couldn't tell, the intricacies of different variations of the languages spoken in China is a little bit confusing, and it's not the aim of today's video. All you need to know is that in Southern Ming/Amoy, the character that was pronounced as cha in Mandarin is instead pronounced as ti, or a variation of it. In example, places that use Southern Min include the city of Shantou, where ti is used, and the province of Fujian, where ta is used. These places are on China's southeast coast, and it's here where Southern Min is used in general. This Southern Min variation ti is of course what gave us the second form of this name we have today, and the fact it was used in China's southeast coast proved to be vital in its exportation across the globe. What's interesting is that these two names of cha and ti tea are both of Chinese origins, albeit completely different parts of China with different languages and dialects, but both Chinese nonetheless. So how exactly did both of these names manage to leave China and leave their mark on the globe? And what exactly dictated which language got which name? Like, why did so much of Europe end up with the tea variation, while much of Asia ended up with the cha variation? Well, this division in the name for this beloved drink seems to have come about due to one simple reason: transportation. It's popularly believed that depending on how tea arrived in a land resulted in the name it received. Many sources have created maps which show us the tea cha division, which has been helpful in the creation of this video. And from looking at these maps, you will notice that the cha name and its variations seem to appear more across Asia and into Eastern Europe. As mentioned, the cha name was popular in Mandarin, the language of mainland China, and far away from the coasts. This meant that when it became time to export tea around the world, those wanting to export it from central China had to do it via horse and cart as opposed to by boat. This meant that the name of cha travelled by land too. This resulted in places and languages that received tea from China via land routes used the name cha, as it was the name the Chinese people selling them the tea used. This is why we use cha in places like India, Korea, and parts of Southeast Asia, which are connected directly by land to China. An interesting case, however, is with Japan, who use the word ocha for tea, which has similar ties to cha, but is somewhat different, and of course, Japan is not connected by land to China. Japan is thought to have gotten this name from Japanese monks who travelled in China and brought tea back with them, as well as due to similarities that the Chinese languages and Japanese language have too. A lot of the online trading of tea, or cha I ought to say in this context, was done via the Silk Road, a network of routes that connected the east to the west. One of the main stopping points on this route was Persia, modern day Iran. In the Persian language, cha became chai. It was from Persian that it became chai in Turkish and Russian too, and chai even in Swahili. This chai spelling variation is sometimes seen as the third main variation of the word. I personally, however, see it as a sub-variation of the cha term, but it's definitely worth highlighting as it's somewhat different. So it was land routes that gave so many other languages the cha name, but how did the word I use for the drink, tea, end up spreading from China across the globe too? Well, as hinted towards, the parts of China which used the tea variation were primarily in the nation's southeast coast. Being by the coast meant that this part of China was way more accessible via ships, and in the 17th century it was Dutch ships who arrived in this part of the world and exported the leaves to Europe. As the Dutch interacted with Chinese people who used the tea names, the Dutch picked up on this name too. Even today the Dutch word for tea is tea. When the Dutch came back to Europe with ships full of the stuff, it got sent all across the continent, with the Dutch telling everyone it was called tea. So pretty much all of Europe, especially the West, dubbed it tea or a variation of tea too. This meant that the term tea also spread to other parts of the world that had been colonized by various European powers too, such as the Americas with Spanish and English dominating there, parts of Africa under English or French rule, parts of Asia under Dutch rule, and even down in Australia and New Zealand. Like the Maori word for tea is just tea, which I can only imagine came from English or Dutch influence there. However, while this concept makes sense from a geographic/historical standpoint, there is one place which kind of goes against the grain in all this, that being Portugal. As mentioned, pretty much all of Western Europe uses a tea variation, and Portugal, which is the most western nation on continental Europe, uses a cha variation instead, being cha more specifically. Portuguese ended up using a cha variation because over 100 years before the Dutch arrived in China to export tea, the Portuguese did it for themselves. They, however, traded tea with Chinese people who, you guessed it, used the cha spelling of the name, so it was the one that they took back with them, which explains why Portuguese uses cha in a sea of tea-speaking nations. This means that other places that speak Portuguese use cha too, like Brazil, most obviously. This, however, explains to us why the world only really has 2 words for tea, but as mentioned, that is something of a lie. There are some other terms out there for tea that have nothing to do with tea or cha, one of the most noticeable ones being the Burmese name for tea, lapet. It's believed that Burmese crafted its own name for the drink due to the fact that, like China, tea leaves grew naturally in Myanmar too, so instead of having the plant introduced to them like the rest of the world, a native name simply occurred for tea naturally. This name of lapet simply means hand leaf. Why it means this, however, I'm not too sure. Maybe because tea was picked by hand, or maybe they thought the leaves looked like little hands. Who's to say? And of course, since the initial exportation of tea, a lot has changed, with there now being so many different kinds of tea. These different kinds of tea all have their own names too, with the 5 basic varieties being black, green, white, oolong, and pure tea. Of course, black, green, and white tea's names come from their colour. Oolong, however, means black dragon tea, which is really badass, and pura comes from a place in China in which this tea was initially grown. But even beyond this, there are still other types of tea, like Earl Grey, named after a British Prime Minister, or chamomile, named after a type of flower. So whatever you like, I'm sure that there is at least one cup of tea that will be your cup of tea. This video topic was suggested by Laura Veronica Granice over on my Patreon. Every Wednesday, I put up a video request post over on my Patreon for my awesome patrons to leave video ideas on. I then pick one of those ideas to be turned into a video the following Wednesday. So if you have a great idea for a Name Explain video and wish to enjoy Name Explain videos ad-free as well as get exclusive content, then why not support the channel on Patreon? It takes just $1 a month to help the channel in a huge way and gets you all of these amazing benefits. Visit patreon.com/nameexplain or click the link down below. Name Explain depends on viewers like yourself supporting the channel financially on Patreon, so a huge thank you to everyone who does. Donating just $1 a month helps the channel amazingly and gets you bonuses including ad-free videos, exclusive content, and the power to request ideas to be made into actual Name Explain videos. $2 a month gets you all that, plus your name here with all these awesome people. Visit patreon.com/nameexplain or click the link down below to find out how you too can support the channel. Thank you. Thanks for reaching the end of the video. Why not watch another and subscribe to keep up to date on all things Name Explain. You can find myself on Instagram where I'm NameExplainYT, and join the Facebook group Friends of Name Explain to talk with myself and other name nerds. All that will be linked down below. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and once again, thank you all so much.